The classroom was buzzing with the usual Monday morning chaos. Students were chatting about their weekends, laughing at jokes, and pulling out notebooks with that half-awake energy that comes with the start of a new school week. But in the very last row, tucked into the corner seat by the window, sat a boy who looked like he wanted to disappear into the walls. His name was Daniel, and he always wore the same black hoodie pulled low over his face. While everyone else was talking and joking around, he just stared at the desk in front of him. His backpack looked old and worn out, with one strap held together by duct tape. He didn't have many school supplies, just a beat-up notebook with pages falling out and a pencil he'd chewed down to almost nothing. Mrs. Patricia Chen had been teaching English for almost 20 years at Roosevelt High School. She'd seen all kinds of students walk through her door. The overachievers who stressed about every grade, the class clowns who turned everything into a joke, the shy kids who slowly came out of their shells. And yes, she'd seen troubled students too, the ones who were fighting battles nobody else could see. Something about Daniel caught her attention from day one. Maybe it was the way he flinched when anyone walked too close to his desk, or how his eyes would dart toward the door like he was always planning an escape route. Most teachers had already written him off. She'd heard them in the staff room during lunch breaks. That kid in the back of your third period? Good luck with him. He's already failed 2 classes. I had him last year. Total waste of time. Never does any homework. Probably won't even graduate. I heard he got suspended twice already for fighting. Just waiting for him to get expelled. But Mrs. Chen had learned something important over her years of teaching. The students who acted the toughest were often the ones who were hurting the most. The ones who seemed the most unreachable were usually the ones who needed someone to reach for them the hardest. She started paying closer attention to Daniel, really watching him, and she noticed things that other people missed. When she read poems out loud in class, his head would lift just slightly. His eyes would focus on her instead of the desk. There was something there hiding behind all that anger and silence, a flicker of interest, a spark that hadn't quite died out yet. During writing assignments, while other students groaned and complained, Daniel would pick up his pencil. His hand would hover over the page like he wanted to write something, like words were fighting to come out. But then he'd catch himself, put the pencil down, and go back to staring at nothing. One day in late September, Mrs. Chen assigned the class to write about a person who influenced their life. The room filled with the sound of pens scratching paper. Students wrote about their parents, their coaches, their older siblings. Daniel just sat there, frozen. Mrs. Chen walked slowly between the desks, checking on students' progress. When she reached Daniel's desk, she saw his paper was completely blank. But his hand was gripping that chewed-up pencil so hard his knuckles had turned white. She didn't make a big deal about it, didn't call him out in front of everyone. She just quietly placed a fresh pencil on his desk and moved on. A small gesture that said, "I see you. I'm not giving up on you." The next day, she found a crumpled piece of paper on her desk before class started. The handwriting was messy, full of crossed-out words and spelling mistakes. But it was there. Daniel had written something. He wrote about his grandmother, who used to read him stories before she died when he was 8, how she was the only person who ever told him he was smart, how he missed her every single day. The writing was raw and honest and heartbreaking. Mrs. Chen kept that paper in her desk drawer. She didn't grade it or make corrections. She just wrote at the bottom, "Your grandmother was right. You are smart. Thank you for sharing this with me." But things weren't getting better for Daniel. If anything, they were getting worse. He started missing more school. When he did show up, there were dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes looked dirty. Sometimes she could hear his stomach growling during class because he hadn't eaten. The other teachers kept complaining. Daniel had gotten into another argument in the hallway. He'd fallen asleep in math class. He'd skipped detention. The principal was talking about alternative schools, about how some kids just weren't meant for a regular classroom environment. Mrs. Chen felt a growing sense of urgency. She'd taught long enough to know what that kind of talk meant. Once the school decided a kid was too much trouble, they'd find ways to push them out. And once a kid like Daniel left, the chances of him finishing high school dropped to almost nothing. Then what? No diploma meant no decent job. No job meant poverty. Poverty meant repeating the same cycle that had probably trapped his family for generations. She couldn't let that happen. Not to this kid. Not when she could see that spark still fighting to stay alive inside him. But Mrs. Chen also knew she was just one teacher. One person in a system that had already decided Daniel was a lost cause. She had 28 other students in that class alone. Over 100 students total across all her classes. Papers to grade every night. Lesson plans to write. Her own family waiting for her at home. How was she supposed to save a kid who was drowning when she was barely keeping her own head above water? Still, every time Daniel walked into her classroom with that hood pulled low and those defeated eyes, something in her chest tightened. She thought about her own son at home, just a year younger than Daniel. She thought about what she'd want someone to do if her kid was the one sitting alone in the back of the classroom with no one fighting for him, and she knew, deep in her bones, that she had to try. Even if it was hard, even if it seemed impossible, even if everyone else had given up. Because sometimes one person who refuses to quit on you can make all the difference between a life lost and a life saved. Daniel didn't know it yet, but his teacher had just decided to become that person for him. The explosion happened on a Tuesday in November. It was one of those gray, cold days when everything feels heavy, the kind of day that matches a bad mood perfectly. Mrs. Chen was in the middle of discussing a chapter from their current book when she noticed Daniel was more on edge than usual. His leg was bouncing under the desk. His jaw was clenched tight. His eyes kept darting around the room like a trapped animal looking for a way out. She should have seen it coming. Should have done something before it was too late. But she was so focused on her lesson that she missed the warning signs until it was too late. A kid named Tyler, who sat 2 rows ahead of Daniel, turned around during the discussion. Tyler was one of those students who thought he was funny but usually just came across as mean. He'd been making little comments to Daniel for weeks. Nothing big enough to get in trouble for. Just small digs designed to get under someone's skin. "Hey, Daniel," Tyler said with a smirk. "Nice shoes, man. Did you get those from the dumpster behind Goodwill?" "Oh, wait, I bet Goodwill wouldn't even take them." A few students laughed. Not because it was actually funny, but because that's what kids do when they're uncomfortable and don't know how else to react. Daniel's whole body went rigid. His face turned red, then white. His hands curled into fists on his desk. "Shut up," he said quietly. "What?" "I'm just saying if you need some money for new shoes, I could probably spare some change. My dad says, people like your family are always looking for handouts anyway." That was it. That was the moment everything broke. Daniel stood up so fast his chair crashed backward onto the floor. In one sweep of his arm, he sent his books, his notebook, and Tyler's backpack flying across the room. Papers scattered everywhere like snow. "I said shut up," Daniel shouted. His voice was raw, full of pain and rage. "You don't know anything about me or my family." He started toward Tyler, and for a second, Mrs. Chen thought he might actually throw a punch. But instead, Daniel just stood there breathing hard, tears starting to form in his eyes. Then he turned and headed straight for the door. "Daniel, wait," Mrs. Chen called out, but he was already gone, the door slamming behind him. The classroom went completely silent. 28 students stared at Mrs. Chen, waiting to see what she'd do. Tyler looked scared now, probably realizing he'd pushed too far. Some kids had their phones out, ready to record whatever happened next. Mrs. Chen made a quick decision. She pulled out her phone and texted the teacher next door, asking her to keep an eye on both classes for a few minutes. Then she looked at her students. "Everyone, I want you to read Chapter 12 and write down 3 discussion questions. I'll be back shortly. Tyler, you and I will be having a conversation later about kindness and respect." She found Daniel halfway, down the hallway, leaning against a locker with his head in his hands. His whole body was shaking. She could hear him trying to hold back sobs. "Daniel," she said softly, approaching slowly like you would with a scared animal. "Come with me. Let's go somewhere we can talk. I'm probably expelled now anyway, he said, his voice muffled. Doesn't matter. You're not expelled. Come on. My classroom has a small office attached. We can talk there. She led him back, past her main classroom where students were pretending to read but obviously watching, and into the tiny office she shared with 2 other teachers. It was barely bigger than a closet, crammed with filing cabinets and stacks of papers, but it was private. Daniel slumped into a chair and pulled his hood up, trying to hide his face. Mrs. Chen sat down across from him and waited. She'd learned that sometimes the best thing you can do is just be quiet and let someone find their words. For a long time, Daniel didn't say anything. He just sat there, shoulders hunched, staring at the floor. Mrs. Chen could see his jaw working like he was trying to decide whether to talk or run. Finally, he spoke. His voice was so quiet she had to lean forward to hear him. My dad's in prison, he said. Got sentenced 6 months ago. 3 years for theft. He was trying to get money for rent and stole from his boss. Mrs. Chen nodded, letting him continue. My mom works 3 jobs now. She leaves at 5 in the morning and doesn't get home until after 10 at night. I barely see her. And I've got 2 little brothers, 8 and 6. I'm the one who has to get them ready for school. Make sure they eat. Help with homework. Put them to bed. The words started coming faster now, like a dam had broken. Last week they shut off our electricity because we couldn't pay the bill. It was off for 4 days. We had to throw away all the food in the fridge. Do you know what it's like trying to explain to a 6-year-old why he can't watch cartoons or why we're eating peanut butter sandwiches in the dark? No, Mrs. Chen said honestly. I can't imagine how hard that must be. I'm so tired all the time. I can't focus in class. I can't do homework because by the time my brothers are asleep, I'm too exhausted to think. And kids like Tyler, they look at my shoes or my clothes and they think they know everything about me. They think I'm just some loser who doesn't care. But I do care. I care so much it hurts. He finally looked up at her and Mrs. Chen's heart broke at what she saw in his face. This wasn't some rebellious teenager who liked causing trouble. This was a 14-year-old kid who was carrying the weight of an entire family on his shoulders. A kid who was drowning and didn't know how to ask for help. My grades are terrible, he continued. I'm probably going to fail most of my classes. And everyone keeps saying I'm going to end up just like my dad. In prison or dead or working some minimum wage job for the rest of my life. Maybe they're right. Maybe that's all people like me are good for. Stop, Mrs. Chen said firmly. That's not true and I won't let you believe it. Why do you even care? Daniel asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice. I'm just another screwed-up kid in your class. I'm sure you have plenty of students who actually try and actually want to be here. Why waste your time on me? Mrs. Chen thought carefully about how to answer. She could give him some teacher speech about how every student matters. But Daniel deserved more than empty words. He deserved the truth. I care because I see you, Daniel. Really see you. I see a kid who wrote one of the most beautiful pieces about his grandmother that I've read in 20 years of teaching. I see someone who gets angry not because he's bad, but because he's in pain. I see a kid who's taking care of his little brothers when most 14-year-olds can barely take care of themselves. That takes strength. That takes heart. She leaned forward, making sure he was looking at her. And I'll tell you something else. Your life doesn't have to turn out the way everyone's predicting. Yeah, things are hard right now. Really hard. But hard doesn't mean impossible. You're not your father. You're not your circumstances. You're Daniel, and you get to decide what kind of man you're going to become. How? He asked, and he sounded so young and lost. How am I supposed to do anything when I can barely survive each day? You don't have to do it alone, Mrs. Chen said. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You're not alone anymore. I'm going to help you. We're going to figure this out together. Why would you do that for me? Because that's what teachers do. Real teachers. We don't just teach subjects. We teach people. And sometimes teaching means showing up for a student even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Daniel was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it anymore. All the anger and frustration and fear he'd been holding inside came pouring out. Mrs. Chen found a box of tissues and handed it to him, giving him time to let it all out. When he finally calmed down, she made him a promise. Starting today, things are going to change. I'm going to connect your mom with some community resources that can help with bills and food. I'm going to tutor you before school and help you catch up on your work. And we're going to meet every week to check in and make sure you're okay. All I need from you is to not give up. Can you do that? Daniel wiped his eyes and nodded slowly. "I'll try," he said. "That's all I'm asking," Mrs. Chen said. "Just try. The rest we'll figure out as we go." She didn't know it then, but that conversation in a cramped office on a cold November day was the turning point. The moment when a drowning boy finally grabbed the lifeline that had been thrown to him. The moment when everything started to change. Mrs. Chen didn't waste any time. The very next day, she started making calls during her lunch break. She contacted the school counselor, the social worker, and a local nonprofit that helped families in crisis. She explained Daniel's situation without sharing more details than necessary, always protecting his privacy. By the end of the week, she'd connected Daniel's mother with a program that helped pay utility bills. They also got signed up for a food bank that delivered groceries twice a month. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. It was enough to take some of the pressure off, but Mrs. Chen knew that solving the immediate crisis wasn't enough. Daniel had fallen so far behind in school that catching up felt almost impossible. He was failing 4 out of 6 classes. He had missing assignments piled up like a mountain, and his confidence was so destroyed that he'd convinced himself he was too stupid to learn. So she made another decision, one that would require sacrifice. Every morning, starting at 7 o'clock, Mrs. Chen opened her classroom an hour before school officially started. Daniel would show up, usually looking half asleep, and they'd work together. Math problems, science homework, English essays. She'd bring breakfast too. Nothing fancy, just bagels or muffins or sometimes just a granola bar and an apple. But it was food, and Daniel always ate it like he was starving. Those early morning sessions became sacred. It was just the two of them in that quiet classroom, while the rest of the school slowly came to life around them. No other students watching, no judgment, just a teacher and a student working together. At first, Daniel was resistant. He'd get frustrated easily, throw down his pencil, and say things like, "I can't do this," or "This is pointless," or "I'm too dumb for this." Mrs. Chen would wait patiently for the storm to pass, then say the same thing every time. "You're not dumb. You're just learning. There's a difference. Now let's try again." Slowly, something started to shift. Daniel began showing up a few minutes early. He'd have his homework out and ready before she even asked. He started asking questions instead of sitting in silence. And most importantly, he started believing that maybe, just maybe, he could actually do this. But it wasn't just about academics. Mrs. Chen understood that Daniel needed more than help with homework. He needed someone who cared about him as a person. So she asked about his brothers, about what he liked to do, about his dreams, even though he'd stopped letting himself dream a long time ago. One morning in December, she brought in a book of poems and read a few out loud. Daniel listened, and when she finished, he said something that surprised her. "I used to write poems when I was younger. My grandmother liked them. Do you still write?" Mrs. Chen asked. He shrugged. "Not really. What's the point?" "The point is that you have a voice. And your voice matters. What if you started writing again? Just for yourself. Not for a grade or an assignment. Just because you want to." Daniel looked skeptical, but that afternoon Mrs. Chen left a new notebook on his desk. It was nothing expensive, just a simple spiral notebook with a blue cover. But inside the front cover she'd written, "For Daniel. Your words matter." She didn't mention it again. Didn't pressure him. Just left it there and moved on. A week later, she found Daniel during lunch sitting by himself in the library, writing in that blue notebook. He quickly tried to hide it when he saw her, but she'd already noticed. She just smiled and walked away, giving him his privacy. After winter break, things started improving even more. Daniel's grades slowly climbed from F's to D's to C's. He started participating in class discussions. Not a lot, but enough that other students began to see him as an actual person, instead of just the weird, quiet kid in the back. Mrs. Chen also started staying after school to help him. Some days it was just for 20 minutes. Other days they'd work for over an hour. She never complained. Never made him feel like he was a burden or taking up too much of her time. One afternoon in late January, while they were working on an English essay, Daniel said something that caught her off guard. "Why are you doing all this for me?" Mrs. Chen looked up from the paper she was grading. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you stay late. You come in early. You bring me food. You helped my mom. You're always checking on me. Why? I'm nobody special. You are special, Daniel. Every student is special. But to answer your question, I'm doing this because someone did it for me once. Daniel looked interested. What do you mean? Mrs. Chen set down her pen. She rarely talked about her personal life with students, but Daniel deserved to know. When I was in college, I almost dropped out. I was the first person in my family to go to university. I didn't know what I was doing. I was drowning in student loans. I was working 2 jobs. I was exhausted and overwhelmed and convinced I'd made a huge mistake. What happened? I had a professor who noticed I was struggling. Professor Reynolds. She started meeting with me every week, helped me organize my time, encouraged me when I wanted to quit. She even helped me find better financial aid. She didn't have to do any of that. But she did. And because of her, I didn't just graduate. I thrived. I became a teacher because of her. Did you ever thank her? Daniel asked. I did. I wrote her a letter after I got my teaching degree. Told her that she changed my life. She wrote back and said something I'll never forget. She said that the best way to thank her was to do the same thing for someone else. To pass it forward, Mrs. Chen looked directly at Daniel. So that's what I'm doing. I'm passing forward the kindness that someone showed me. And someday when you're in a position to help someone else, I hope you'll do the same. Daniel was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he nodded slowly. I will, he said. I promise. February brought a new challenge. The school announced they were having a writing contest for students. The winner would get their work published in the local newspaper and receive a $500 prize. Mrs. Chen immediately thought of Daniel. You should enter, she told him one morning during their tutoring session. No way, Daniel said, shaking his head. I'm not good enough for that. That's not true. You're an excellent writer. You just don't believe in yourself yet. Even if I wanted to, which I don't, what would I even write about? Write about what you know. Write about your life. Write about what it's really like to be a teenager dealing with adult problems. Write the truth. Daniel looked scared. That's too personal. The best writing usually is, Mrs. Chen said gently. But it's your choice. I'm not going to force you. I just think you have something important to say and people need to hear it. She left it at that. Didn't bring it up again. But she noticed Daniel thinking about it. She'd catch him staring out the window during class with that look people get when words are forming in their head. 2 weeks before the contest deadline, Daniel stayed after school and handed Mrs. Chen a stack of handwritten pages. I wrote something, he said quietly, but it's probably terrible. You don't have to read it if you don't want to. I'd be honored to read it, Mrs. Chen said. That night, sitting at her kitchen table after her own kids had gone to bed, Mrs. Chen read Daniel's submission. It was a personal essay about being 14 and responsible for raising his brothers, about poverty and shame and hunger, about wearing the same shoes until they fell apart, about the electricity being shut off, about adults who'd given up on him and the one teacher who hadn't. She cried reading it, not because it was sad, though it was, but because it was real and raw and beautifully honest, because Daniel had found his voice and it was powerful. The next morning, she told him the truth. Daniel, this is exceptional. You need to submit this. You really think it's good enough? I think it's more than good enough. I think you might actually win. He didn't win. He came in second place. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that his essay was published. What mattered was the $500 that helped his family get caught up on rent. What mattered was that Daniel saw his name in print and realized he had talent. Real talent. Other students started treating him differently after that. Not like the weird kid who exploded in class, but like someone who had something to offer, someone worth knowing. And Daniel started treating himself differently too. He walked with his head up instead of staring at the ground. He smiled sometimes. He even made a few friends. By March, his GPA had climbed to a 2.8. He was passing all his classes. He'd even joined the school newspaper as a writer. Mrs. Chen would watch him during class, participating in discussions and helping other students, and feel this overwhelming sense of pride. This was why she became a teacher, not for the paycheck or the summers off or the pension, but for moments like this, for the chance to watch a student who'd been written off by everyone else discover that they were capable of so much more than they ever imagined. Daniel still had hard days. Days when the weight of everything felt too heavy, days when he wanted to give up. But now he had someone to call, someone who answered every time, someone who reminded him that hard days don't last forever, and that he was stronger than he thought. And slowly, one day at a time, one small victory at a time, Daniel stopped being the troubled kid in the back of the classroom. He started becoming the person he was always meant to be. By the time Daniel entered his junior year of high school, he was almost unrecognizable from the angry, defeated freshman who'd sat in the back of Mrs. Chen's classroom 2 years earlier. His GPA had climbed to a 3.4. He was taking advanced placement English. He'd become the editor of the school newspaper. And most importantly, he'd started to believe in himself. But the transformation hadn't happened overnight. It took 2 years of early morning tutoring sessions, 2 years of phone calls every Sunday evening where Mrs. Chen would check in and ask how his week went. 2 years of small encouragements and patient explanations and someone refusing to let him quit on himself. Daniel still faced challenges. His family situation hadn't magically fixed itself. His dad was still in prison, though he'd be getting out soon. His mom still worked long hours. Daniel still had to take care of his brothers most evenings. Money was still tight, though not quite as desperate as it had been. But now he had tools to deal with those challenges. He had people he could call when things got overwhelming. He had teachers who saw his potential, instead of just his problems. And he had a plan for his future that seemed actually possible instead of just a fantasy. College. That word that had once seemed like it belonged to other people. Rich kids, smart kids. Kids whose parents went to college. Not kids like Daniel who came from families where dropping out was more common than graduating. But Mrs. Chen refused to let him think that way. "You're going to college," she told him one afternoon during their weekly check-in. They'd moved their meetings from early mornings to after school since Daniel had gotten his act together. Not because it's what you should do, but because you have the talent and the drive and you deserve the same opportunities as anyone else. "College costs money," Daniel said. "A lot of money. Money we don't have. That's what scholarships are for, and financial aid. And work-study programs. Daniel, there are kids with worse grades and fewer accomplishments than you who go to college every single year. If they can do it, so can you." She wasn't just giving him empty encouragement. She was actively helping him make it happen. They spent hours researching colleges together, looking at schools that offered good financial aid packages, schools that had programs for first-generation college students, schools that were far enough away to give him independence but close enough that he could come home if his family needed him. Mrs. Chen helped him study for the SAT. She borrowed prep books from the library. She printed out practice tests. She spent Saturday mornings going over math problems and vocabulary words. When the test day came, Daniel scored better than he'd ever dreamed possible. Not perfect, but good enough. More than good enough. Then came the applications. Daniel had never felt so overwhelmed in his life. Essays, forms, letters of recommendation, transcripts, financial aid paperwork. It felt impossible, but Mrs. Chen broke it down into manageable pieces. "One application at a time," she said. "One essay at a time. You don't have to do it all at once." She helped him write his personal statement. It was about resilience, about being a kid who'd almost given up but found a reason to keep fighting, about the teacher who believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. It was honest and powerful, and when Daniel finally submitted it, he felt like he'd accomplished something huge. Mrs. Chen wrote him a letter of recommendation that brought tears to his eyes when she let him read it. She didn't just list his accomplishments. She told his story. She explained where he'd come from and how far he'd traveled. She wrote about his character, his determination, his heart. She wrote about a student who'd become more than just someone in her class, someone she was genuinely proud of. They applied to 8 schools, 2 reach schools that were probably long shots, 4 solid options where he had a real chance, and 2 safety schools just in case. Then they waited. Waiting was torture. Daniel checked his email constantly. Every notification made his heart jump. He tried not to think about it, but it was impossible. His whole future felt like it was hanging in the balance. The first response came in February of his junior year. A rejection from one of the reach schools. Daniel felt crushed even though he'd expected it. "It's okay," Mrs. Chen told him. "Rejection is part of the process. It doesn't mean you're not good enough. It just means they had limited spots and too many qualified applicants. There are other schools, better schools for you." A week later, another rejection, then an acceptance to one of his safety schools, then a waitlist. The roller coaster of emotions was exhausting. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in March, Daniel got the email that changed everything. Congratulations. You have been accepted to the State University Honors Program. Additionally, you have been awarded the Promise Scholarship, a full-ride scholarship that covers tuition, fees, room, and board for 4 years. Daniel read it 3 times to make sure he wasn't misunderstanding. Then he read it a 4th time. Then he ran. He ran through the hallways of the school, not caring that classes were still in session. He ran until he found Mrs. Chen's classroom. She was in the middle of teaching 4th period, but when she saw Daniel's face in the doorway, she knew immediately. "Excuse me for just one moment," she told her class, and stepped into the hallway. "I got in," Daniel said, his voice shaking. "Full scholarship. They're paying for everything. I'm going to college." Mrs. Chen pulled him into a hug, something she rarely did with students. But this wasn't just any student. This was Daniel, and she'd been fighting for this moment for over 2 years. "I'm so proud of you," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "You did this. You worked so hard and you earned every bit of this." "I couldn't have done it without you," Daniel said, tears streaming down his face. "You know that, right? None of this would have happened if you hadn't believed in me." "I just showed you what was already there," Mrs. Chen said. "You had the strength and the intelligence all along. You just needed someone to help you see it." Word spread through the school quickly. Daniel, the kid who'd been failing 2 years ago, had gotten a full ride to college. Teachers who'd written him off were suddenly patting him on the back. Students who'd ignored him were congratulating him. The principal even mentioned him during morning announcements. But the person who mattered most was Daniel's mom. He called her from the school office, and she cried so hard she couldn't speak for a full minute. When she finally found her words, she said, "Your grandmother would be so proud." "I'm so proud. You broke the cycle, baby. You broke it." The rest of junior year and all of senior year felt different. Daniel still worked hard, still took care of his brothers, still dealt with all the same challenges, but now he was working towards something real, something concrete, a future that wasn't just possible but guaranteed. He threw himself into his role at the school newspaper. He wrote articles about student homelessness, about poverty, about the struggles that kids like him faced every day. His writing was raw and honest and opened people's eyes to realities they'd been ignoring. Teachers started using his articles in their classes as examples of good journalism and important social commentary. Mrs. Chen watched him bloom with a sense of satisfaction she'd rarely felt in her teaching career. She'd taught thousands of students over the years. Most of them she remembered fondly, but Daniel was special. Not because he was smarter or more talented than everyone else, but because she'd watched him rise from rock bottom. She'd seen him transform from a kid who'd given up on life to a young man who was ready to take on the world. During his senior year, Daniel started thinking about what he wanted to study in college. At first, he thought about journalism. He was good at writing, after all. But as he reflected on his own journey, he realized what he really wanted to do. "I want to be a counselor," he told Mrs. Chen one day, "like a therapist or a school counselor. I want to help kids who are going through what I went through, kids who think they're not good enough or smart enough or that their lives are already decided. I want to be for them what you were for me." Mrs. Chen felt her eyes well up. "That's a beautiful goal, Daniel. You're going to be amazing at it." "I'm going to major in psychology," he continued, getting excited as the plan formed in his mind. "Then get my master's in counseling. Maybe even my doctorate someday. I want to specialize in working with at-risk youth. Kids from low-income families. Kids who've had trauma. I know what they're going through because I lived it." "The world needs more counselors who've walked in their clients' shoes," Mrs. Chen said. "Your experience won't just make you good at this. It'll make you exceptional." Graduation day arrived in June. Daniel wore his cap and gown, walking across that stage to accept his diploma with his head held high. His mom was in the audience crying happy tears. His little brothers were there, cheering louder than anyone. And Mrs. Chen was there too, not just as his teacher but as someone who'd become like family. After the ceremony, Daniel found her in the crowd. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything, for not giving up on me, for seeing something in me when I couldn't see it myself, for changing my life." "You changed your own life," Mrs. Chen said. "I just helped you see that you could. Now go out there and do great things, and remember your promise." "I remember," Daniel said. "Pass it forward. Help someone else the way you helped me." "Exactly," Mrs. Chen smiled. "The world needs more people like you, Daniel. More people who've overcome. More people who understand struggle and come out the other side with compassion instead of bitterness. As Daniel walked away to celebrate with his family, Mrs. Chen felt a profound sense of completion. This was why she taught. This was why she sacrificed her lunch breaks and her evenings and her early mornings. For moments like this, for students like Daniel, she didn't know it yet, but their story wasn't over. In fact, in many ways, it was just beginning. 10 years. That's how long it had been since Daniel had walked across the stage at Roosevelt High School to accept his diploma. 10 years since Mrs. Chen had watched one of her most challenging students become one of her greatest success stories. 10 years of life happening in ways neither of them could have predicted. Mrs. Chen was approaching retirement now. Her hair had gone completely gray. Her steps were a little slower. But her passion for teaching hadn't dimmed one bit. She still arrived early. Still stayed late. Still looked for the student sitting in the back corner who needed someone to see them. She'd kept in touch with Daniel over the years through occasional emails and holiday cards. She knew he'd graduated from State University with honors. She knew he'd gone on to get his master's degree in counseling psychology. She knew he'd started his doctorate. But they hadn't seen each other face to face in almost a decade. So when she received an email from the principal asking her to attend a special Teacher Appreciation Week assembly, she thought it was just another routine school event. Probably some speeches, maybe some flowers, perhaps a generic thank you certificate. She almost didn't go. But something made her say yes. The auditorium was packed. Students filled the seats, chattering with that pre-assembly energy. Teachers sat in the first few rows, looking tired like teachers always do. Mrs. Chen found a seat near the front, next to a colleague who taught math. "Do you know what this is about?" her colleague whispered. "No idea," Mrs. Chen replied. "Probably just the usual appreciation stuff." The principal walked onto the stage and asked for everyone's attention. The room gradually quieted down. "Today we have a very special guest," the principal began. "Someone who graduated from this school 10 years ago. Someone whose story is a testament to the power of education and the difference one teacher can make in a student's life. Please welcome Dr. Daniel Rivera." Mrs. Chen's heart stopped. She watched as a young man walked onto the stage, and it took her a moment to recognize him. He wore a suit. His hair was neatly cut. He carried himself with confidence. But when he smiled, she saw the 14-year-old boy who used to sit in the back of her classroom with his hood pulled low. Daniel. Her Daniel. But he wasn't that scared, angry teenager anymore. He'd become a man, a doctor. Someone who'd made something of himself despite every obstacle that had been thrown in his way. Their eyes met across the auditorium, and Daniel's smile grew wider. He gave her a small nod, and Mrs. Chen felt tears already forming. "Thank you all for having me here today," Daniel began, his voice steady and clear. "I know you probably have a million other things you'd rather be doing than listening to some old graduate give a speech. But I promise this won't take too long, and I hope my story might matter to some of you." He paused, looking out at the sea of students. "When I was a freshman here at Roosevelt, I was failing, not just failing classes, but failing at life. My dad was in prison. My mom worked 3 jobs. I was taking care of my 2 little brothers while trying to survive high school. I was angry all the time. I was tired all the time. I was hungry most of the time. I wore the same shoes until they literally fell apart. I genuinely believed my life was already decided and it wasn't going to be a good life." The auditorium had gone completely silent. Students were actually listening. Even the teachers sat up straighter, paying attention. I was sitting in the back of an English class and I didn't care about anything. I'd already decided I was going to drop out as soon as I turned 16. What was the point of school when I was just going to end up like my dad anyway? That's what everyone said. That's what I believed. Daniel's voice got a little emotional, and he took a breath to steady himself. But there was this teacher, Mrs. Patricia Chen. She taught English, and for some reason she saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. She didn't just see a troubled kid who disrupted class. She saw potential. She saw someone worth fighting for. He looked directly at Mrs. Chen, who was now openly crying. Mrs. Chen started showing up an hour before school to tutor me. She brought me breakfast because she knew I wasn't eating. She stayed late to help me with homework. She connected my mom with resources that helped keep our lights on and food on our table. She called me every single Sunday evening for 2 years to check in and make sure I was okay. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. When I wanted to give up, she wouldn't let me. When I said I was too stupid to learn, she proved I was wrong. When I said college wasn't for people like me, she sat down and helped me apply to 8 different schools. She wrote me a letter of recommendation that made me cry. She believed in me so completely that eventually I started believing in myself. Daniel pulled out a piece of paper from his jacket pocket. His hands were shaking slightly. This is from the essay I wrote when I was 16. It won 2nd place in a writing contest, and it was the first time I realized I might actually be good at something. Mrs. Chen is the one who encouraged me to write it. She's the one who told me my voice mattered. He read a short excerpt, his voice thick with emotion. It was about struggle and hope and the power of one person who refuses to give up on you. I got a full ride to State University, Daniel continued, folding the paper and putting it back in his pocket. I graduated with honors with a degree in psychology. I got my master's in counseling, and last month I successfully defended my doctoral dissertation. I'm now Dr. Daniel Rivera, and I work as a counseling psychologist specializing in at-risk youth. The auditorium erupted in applause. Students were clapping. Teachers were standing. But Daniel wasn't done. Every single day I work with kids who remind me of myself at 14. Kids who think their lives are already decided. Kids who've been told they're not good enough or smart enough or that they'll never amount to anything. And you know what I tell them? I tell them about Mrs. Chen. I tell them that it only takes one person who believes in you to change everything. He looked out at the students, his voice getting stronger. Some of you in this audience are struggling right now. Maybe not in the same way I was, but you're struggling. And you think no one notices. You think no one cares. But I'm here to tell you that's not true. There are teachers in this building who see you, who care about you, who are waiting for the chance to help you if you'll just let them. Then he turned fully toward Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen, would you please come up here? Mrs. Chen was shaking her head, trying to decline, but her colleagues were encouraging her. Students started clapping. Slowly, she stood and made her way to the stage, tears streaming down her face. When she reached Daniel, he pulled her into a hug. After a moment, he stepped back and held up a plaque. This says, "To Mrs. Patricia Chen, the teacher who saved my life. Your belief in me changed everything. I carry your lessons and your compassion with me every single day. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for not giving up when everyone else did. Thank you for showing me that one person who truly cares can change the trajectory of an entire life." He handed her the plaque, but he wasn't finished. "You told me once about your professor who helped you through college. Professor Reynolds. You said she told you that the best way to thank her was to pass it forward, to help someone else the way she helped you. You did that for me, Mrs. Chen. You passed it forward. And now I'm doing the same thing." Daniel's voice broke with emotion. "I work with at-risk kids every single day because of you. Every time I help a teenager who reminds me of myself, I think of you. Every time I refuse to give up on a kid that everyone else has written off, I'm honoring what you did for me. You didn't just change my life, Mrs. Chen. You changed all the lives I'll touch throughout my career. The ripple effect of your kindness is going to reach hundreds, maybe thousands of young people. And it all started because you decided that one angry, troubled freshman in the back of your classroom was worth your time." The entire auditorium was standing now, applauding. Students were crying. Teachers were crying. Mrs. Chen was sobbing as she hugged Daniel again. "Thank you," Daniel whispered so only she could hear. "Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for being the person I needed when I had no one else. Thank you for teaching me that my past doesn't define my future. Thank you for everything." Mrs. Chen pulled back and looked at the young man Daniel had become. The scared boy was gone. In his place was someone strong, compassionate, and dedicated to helping others the way he'd been helped. "I'm so proud of you," she managed to say through her tears. "You did this, Daniel. You put in the work. You fought for yourself. I just helped you see what was already there." "No," Daniel said firmly. "We did this together. That's what you taught me, that we don't have to face our battles alone. That asking for help isn't weakness. That accepting support is actually strength. Those lessons saved my life, and now I teach them to every single one of my clients." As they stood there on that stage, surrounded by applause, Mrs. Chen realized something profound. Teaching wasn't just about lesson plans and test scores and curriculum standards. It was about this. It was about seeing students as whole human beings with stories and struggles and potential. It was about showing up day after day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. It was about believing in people until they learned to believe in themselves. Later, after the assembly ended and the students filed out, Daniel and Mrs. Chen sat in her empty classroom. The same classroom where they'd spent countless early mornings working together. The same classroom where Daniel had broken down and told her about his life. The same classroom where everything had changed. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't helped me?" Daniel asked. Mrs. Chen shook her head. "I try not to, but I'll tell you what I think about instead. I think about all the kids you're helping now. All the lives you're changing. All the teenagers who will make it because you're there to guide them. That's your legacy, Daniel, and I'm honored that I got to play a small part in helping you create it." "Small part?" Daniel laughed. "Mrs. Chen, you were everything. You were the turning point. The moment my life split between the path I was on and the path I ended up taking." They talked for another hour, catching up on life, sharing stories, laughing and crying. When it was finally time for Daniel to leave, he gave her one last hug. "I'll never forget what you did for me," he said. "Never. I'll never forget you either," Mrs. Chen replied. "You reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place." As she watched Daniel walk out of her classroom one final time, no longer a student but a colleague, a fellow helper of troubled youth, Mrs. Chen felt a sense of peace. She'd taught thousands of students over her career. She'd helped countless young people. But Daniel's story would always be special. It would always remind her that even when the work feels impossible, even when a student seems unreachable, even when everyone else has given up, one teacher who refuses to quit can change everything. That's the power of education. That's the power of compassion. That's the power of believing in someone until they learn to believe in themselves. And that's a lesson worth teaching, over and over again, for as long as there are students who need to hear it.